Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Lords Amendments 1 and 51 on the Customs Union and the EEA. And just to be clear, Mr. Speaker, I regard Brexit rather like the hay fever I'm suffering from at the moment, consistently horrendous, and there's very little that can mitigate the appalling effects. But I'm absolutely clear that if we are to leave the European Union, then the least worst options are for us to continue participating in these two entities. All the evidence shows this, as do many British businesses. Now, the arguments for the Customs Union are well made by the opposition frontbench, so I'm going to concentrate on the EEA. It's not the perfect model. I've never claimed otherwise, but it should be the starting point of any discussion when we say we seek, as both the main parties do, the exact same benefits as the single market in any deal. And as has been said, the EU is clear. Michel Barnier said it yesterday. We can be part of the Customs Union and the EEA. It is true. We will no longer have a vote at the EU Council on EEA rules. Rather, we'll be a rule shaper sitting on the committees that draw up those EEA rules. But let's be honest, none of this really goes to the heart of where most concern lies about the EEA. It's immigration and the continuation of some form of free movement. Those are the big issues, the two elephants in the room. Now, I'm the son of an immigrant, and I represent a constituency where the majority of families are of an immigrant background. But I acknowledge many of the communities that this party on this side of the House represents are the opposite. Now, there is concern about immigration out there. We cannot duck it, we cannot ignore it. And if we're honest, views are just as strong, if not stronger, in relation to non-EU immigration as they are in relation to EU immigration. And there are parallels here between the discontent in some of our traditional seats about EU immigration now as there was regarding Commonwealth immigration in the 1960s, of which my late father was a part. There was, after all, a form of free movement from the Commonwealth until 1971, and there is now, of course, a form of EU free movement, and would be if we are in the EEA. I do not, and I've never denied, that immigration can pose challenges to communities, both economic and cultural, but it need not be this way if we implement the right policies. Our former Prime Minister, our former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, as has already said, has put forward a 6-point plan package to address some of these concerns to better manage immigration, which included acting to prevent the undercutting of wages by immigrants, removing newcomers after 9 months if they fail to find a job, and putting in place a bigger fund to help mitigate the impact of migration on local communities. I would add, and I will give way, that we need to do far, far more to help integrate immigrants into their local communities, to speak English, learn about the culture and so on. My father was so successful at this that he married an English woman and had mixed heritage children. And of course, in terms of the things we can do to better manage migration, we can do these things now, whilst we are actually part of the EEA, and I support them. But what are the real underlying causes of concern here? Not enough decent affordable housing, the shortage of school places, an NHS in crisis, not enough well-paid and decent jobs. Let us not pretend that all these problems will disappear or be mitigated if we cease participating in the EEA. As honourable members are saying, they will get worse because there will be less revenue going to the Exchequer to pay for these things, because these underlying problems are no more the fault of European immigrants now than they were the fault of the Commonwealth citizens who came here in the 1960s and the 1970s. And make no mistake, people were saying exactly the same things in traditional Labour voting areas about the Windrush generation, about South Asian immigration, about the likes of my father from West Africa being the cause of our problems way back then, as they do now in respect of EU citizens. But curbing Commonwealth immigration then and ending EU free movement now did not and is not going to solve these problems, and we know it. That is why Labour governments have always addressed these problems by properly funding the NHS, by having a national minimum wage, by investing in our schools and so on. Now that is why I will be voting for my frontbench's amendment, but also the Lord's Amendment too. And a colleague came up to me in the tea room yesterday. She represents a seat in the North West, and to my surprise, I have to say, she told me she will also be voting for the Lord's EEA amendment. And when I asked her how comes you're going to be doing this, in spite of the issues and the challenges I know many colleagues on this side of the House have to deal with in respect of that issue, which I don't have to deal with in my own constituency. She said to me, yes, there are big concerns about immigration, certainly compared to your area, Chuka, but the bottom line is we have nothing like the amount of immigration from the EU or outside the EU as your constituency. And I know the cause of our problems is not that immigration, so I'm not going to go round saying I agree with any claim that that is to be the case. The bottom line for me is I'm not going to go along with that, she said to me, because I know what it will do. It won't help us deal with any of those problems. What it will do is deprive people of jobs. And that's why I say to colleagues on this side of the House, we should not ignore this issue of immigration, but let us deal with the problems, the underlying causes, in a Labour way. That is what our history dictates.